December 14th, 1945. Camp Huntsville, Texas. The wind cut through the barbed wire like a promise of punishment. Helga Reinhardt, 26 years old and exhausted from 3 days in a transport truck, stood with 49 other German women in the frozen dirt of the prisoner compound, waiting to see what mercy, or vengeance, America had prepared for them. She heard the footsteps first, boots on gravel, then voices, low and measured, speaking English she couldn't fully understand. The woman beside her, Ingrid Koch, grabbed Helga's wrist. "Don't look up," Ingrid hissed. "Whatever they do, don't give them a reason." Everything Helga had been taught said this moment would be the reckoning. They were prisoners of war now, captured Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe auxiliaries, women who'd worked communications for the Reich, women who'd believed in the cause. But when the guards approached through the December cold, Helga's breath caught. They weren't white American soldiers. They were black. The propaganda reels had shown Americans as criminals, gun-toting mobsters from Chicago and New York. But black soldiers, the training officers in Berlin, had used different words for them. Untermenschen, subhuman, dangerous, incapable of discipline, intellect, or restraint. Every lecture, every slide, every warning had painted them as something less than men. If you are ever captured, her instructor, Oberstleutnant Drescher, had warned during a 1943 briefing, and if you encounter Negro troops, expect no mercy. They are ruled by instinct, not reason. Helga had believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was an officer. He was supposed to know. But now, standing in the frozen wind of Texas, Helga watched as the lead guard, a tall, broad-shouldered sergeant with careful eyes, stopped 10 feet away. He held up both hands, palms open, showing he was unarmed. Then he spoke in slow, deliberate German. "Wir haben Essen, Kaffee, ihr seid hier sicher." We have food, coffee. You are safe here. Helga's entire world fractured down the center, because the voice that spoke those words was kind, and everything she'd been taught said that was impossible. But before we explore this untold chapter of history, one that neither side wanted to talk about, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. The 93rd Infantry Division had been assigned to Camp Huntsville, along with detachments from the 92nd and elements of the 24th Infantry Regiment. Segregated black units that America sent to guard prisoners but wouldn't allow to eat in the same diners as the white soldiers who served beside them. For the German women arriving at these camps, women who had been trained to see racial hierarchy as scientific fact, the first encounters with black American guards created a cognitive collapse so total that some years of indoctrination shattered in a single afternoon. Helga Reinhardt had spent her entire adult life learning the Reich's version of truth. Germans at the top, other Europeans below them, Slavs beneath that, and at the very bottom, the Schwarz, black people, subhuman, the textbook said, incapable of civilization, culture, honor, or self-control. Her training instructor, Oberstleutnant Drescher, had been particularly emphatic during a racial science lecture in Munich, 1943. "If you ever encounter a Negro soldier," he'd said, pacing in front of a propaganda slide showing caricatures of bestial faces, "remember, they are driven by base impulses. They have no concept of mercy, discipline, or moral restraint. They are predators wearing uniforms." Helga had believed him. She'd written it in her notebook. She'd repeated it to younger recruits. But now, standing in the frozen compound, with her wrists still raw from the transport shackles, Helga watched as Sergeant Samuel Green carefully set down a wooden crate filled with tin cups of steaming coffee. He stepped back immediately, gave them space, didn't shout, didn't threaten. Another guard, younger, maybe 22, with a soft southern accent, placed 2 loaves of bread beside the crate and a stack of wool blankets. Then they both retreated to the guard tower and waited. "It's a trick," the woman next to Helga whispered. "They want to see if we're desperate. If we are, they'll—" But Ingrid Koch, the translator who'd worked in signals intelligence and spoke near-perfect English, stepped forward. She was shaking, but she walked to the crate, picked up a cup of coffee, and held it to her lips. The guards didn't move. Ingrid drank. Then she turned back to the group, tears streaming down her face, and said in German, "Es ist echt. Es ist warm." It's real. It's warm. That night, Helga sat in the barracks eating bread and drinking bitter camp coffee, while 3 women around her wept in confusion. "I don't understand," one of them kept saying. "They're supposed to be animals. That's what we were told. I don't understand." Neither did Helga, but the real unraveling had only just begun. In another corner of the camp, 34-year-old Greta Schiller had a different first encounter. She'd been separated from the main group during processing, sick with fever, coughing so hard she couldn't stand. The guards had taken her to the infirmary, and when she woke up hours later, delirious and terrified, she found a black medic sitting beside her cot. He was reading a book. When he noticed she was awake, he set it down, poured her a glass of water, and said in halting German, "Fieber ist besser. Du wirst überleben." Fever is better. You will survive. Greta stared at him, at his hands gentle and careful as he adjusted the blanket over her shoulders, at his face patient and tired, the face of a man who'd been on duty too long and still showed up. The contradiction made no sense in the world she'd been taught to see. She'd expected a monster. She found a medic. And somewhere in that gap between expectation and reality, something inside her broke open and began, against all odds, to heal. To understand how profoundly these moments shattered everything Helga and the others believed, we need to go back. Back to 1943. Back to a lecture hall in Berlin where young women like Helga sat in crisp uniforms, notebooks open, ready to learn what the Reich called racial science. Back to the place where the lies began. Berlin, April 1943. The lecture hall smelled of floor wax and ambition. 43 young women sat in precise rows, notebooks open, fountain pens poised. They wore the gray-green auxiliary uniforms of the Nachrichtenhelferinnen, the Wehrmacht's communications corps, and they were there to learn what the Reich called essential knowledge. Oberstleutnant Heinrich Drescher stood at the front, pointer in hand, beside a projection screen showing a chart labeled Racial Hierarchy of Human Civilization. At the top, Arische Volker, the Aryan peoples. At the bottom, in bold red ink, Neger, Untermenschen, black people, subhumans. "What you see before you," Drescher said, his voice carrying the weight of professorial authority, "is not opinion. It is science, measurable, observable, fact." Helga Reinhardt, 24 years old and fresh from her communications certification, wrote every word in her notebook. This wasn't propaganda. This was a lecture at the Wehrmacht Training Academy. This was education. Drescher clicked to the next slide. A propaganda photograph, distorted, exaggerated, showed a black soldier with features twisted into something monstrous. The caption read, "The American Negro, incapable of discipline or moral restraint." "If Germany falls," Drescher continued, tapping the image with his pointer, "these will be the creatures occupying our streets. The Americans are using them as cannon fodder, expendable animals sent to die first. But make no mistake, they are dangerous, driven by base instincts, violent, unpredictable." A younger recruit raised her hand. "Herr Oberstleutnant, what if we encounter them?" Drescher's expression turned grave. "If you are captured and placed under Negro guards, expect no mercy. They do not understand concepts like honor or restraint. Protect yourselves. Show no weakness. And remember," he paused for emphasis, They are not men in the way we understand men to be. They are something less. Helga underlined the word twice. Less. She believed him. They all did. In Munich, the message was the same. In Frankfurt, identical. Every training academy, every briefing, every propaganda reel reinforced the lie until it became truth worn smooth by repetition. Black soldiers are subhuman. Black soldiers are dangerous. Black soldiers are incapable of civilization. Camp Huntsville, December 1945. Helga stood shivering in the yard during evening roll call, her threadbare coat doing nothing against the Texas wind. She heard footsteps behind her. Boots. Slow. Measured. Not threatening. Sergeant Samuel Green appeared beside her, holding a folded wool blanket. He didn't speak. He simply held it out. Helga stared at him, at this man her instructor had called less than human, and saw exhaustion in his eyes, the kind of tired that came from long shifts, from doing a job no one thanked you for, from treating people with dignity even when your own country wouldn't do the same for you. Green gestured to the blanket, raised his eyebrows. Take it. Helga's hands trembled as she reached out. Their fingers didn't touch. He released the blanket before contact, stepping back to give her space, to let her choose. Thank you, she whispered in broken English. Green nodded once, then walked away. Helga wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and felt the warmth sink into her bones. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Oberstleutnant Drescher's voice grew quieter. Not gone, but quieter. Camp Huntsville, December 1945. Third week of captivity. The women had developed a routine. Morning roll call, work assignments, meals in the mess hall, evening return to the barracks, and in between, whispered conversations in corners where guards couldn't hear, though increasingly they wondered if the guards would even care. It was Ingrid Koch who said it first. They were sitting on their bunks after dinner, 5 women huddled for warmth, when Ingrid gestured toward the window where Sergeant Green was making his rounds, checking the perimeter in the freezing dark. "You know what's strange?" Ingrid said, her voice low. "I feel safer here than I ever did in Berlin." Silence. Then Helga, surprising herself, laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're right. They're a lot kinder than our men ever were." The words hung in the air like confession. Another woman, Greta, the one who'd been sick, let out a nervous giggle. Then another joined. Within seconds, they were all laughing, the kind of laughter that comes when you don't know whether to cry or scream, when humor is the only pressure valve left. "Remember Hauptmann Bruckner?" someone said. "He'd slap you for slouching." Or Oberleutnant Fischer. "He threw a typewriter at Anna for making an error in a transmission." And Drescher, God, Drescher called us disposable during the Bremen evacuation. Said we were expendable compared to the male officers. The laughter died as quickly as it came. Helga stared at her hands, the same hands that had typed messages for men who treated her like equipment. The same hands that had saluted officers who'd barely learned her name. "They never offered us blankets," she said quietly. No one responded. They didn't need to. 2 days later, Helga saw it happen. Morning work detail. The women were carrying supply crates from the trucks to the storage building. Routine labor, nothing demanding. But one of the prisoners, an older woman named Annalisa, had been sick for days. Weak, feverish. Halfway across the yard, Annalisa collapsed. The crate hit the ground. Supplies scattered. Helga froze, remembering a similar scene in Munich. A woman had fainted during training drills. The officer in charge had ordered her to get up. When she couldn't, he'd left her there as a lesson about weakness. But Sergeant Green was already moving. He ran, not marched, ran, across the yard and knelt beside Annalise. He didn't shout orders, didn't demand she stand. He checked her pulse, his hands gentle and practiced, then called for the medic. Within seconds, 2 guards arrived with a stretcher. Green stayed with Annalisa the entire time, one hand on her shoulder, speaking softly in his halting German. Du bist okay. We're helfen dir. You're okay. We're helping you. They carried her to the infirmary. Green walked alongside the stretcher. Helga stood in the yard, surrounded by scattered supplies, and felt something crack open inside her chest. This wasn't strategy, wasn't manipulation, wasn't a trick to gain compliance. This was a man who saw another human being in pain and ran to help. She'd been taught this man was subhuman. She'd been taught he was incapable of empathy, discipline, or moral reasoning. She'd been taught he was less. But standing there watching him disappear into the infirmary with the same care a father might show a daughter, Helga understood with devastating clarity. Everything she'd been taught was a lie, and she had believed it. Camp Huntsville, January 1946. Sergeant Samuel Green sat in the guard station after lights out, a sheet of paper in front of him and a pen that kept running dry. Writing home was always the hardest part of the day. Dear Mama, it's strange here. The German women prisoners, they're terrified of us. Not because of anything we've done, but because of what they were taught to believe. They look at me like I'm something that shouldn't exist. A black man in an American uniform, with authority, with responsibility. The irony isn't lost on me. I was trained to treat enemy prisoners with more dignity than Georgia ever treated me. I can guard Nazi women with respect, but I can't eat at the diner 2 miles from our base. I can maintain order in this camp, but I needed a military ID just to use a whites-only bathroom on the way here. These women feared me. Now some of them smile when I pass. One said, "Good morning," in English yesterday. Small things, Mama, but strange ones. He paused, pen hovering, then added, "I don't hate them. Maybe I should. But I just see people who were lied to. Same as we were. Just different lies." Your son, Samuel. The empathy came in small doses, gradual, unspoken. During morning rounds, Green started teaching basic English phrases. Good morning. Thank you. Please. The women listened, repeated, their accents thick, but their effort genuine. Helga volunteered most often. She'd approach the fence during his patrol, hesitant, and ask, "How do you say Decke?" "Blanket," Green would reply. She'd repeat it. He'd nod. No grand speeches, just exchange. When Ingrid Koch received a letter from home, her mother had died, Green found her weeping in the yard. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He simply stood 15 feet away, a respectful distance, and waited. After 10 minutes, Ingrid looked up. Green met her eyes and nodded once. "I see you. Take your time." Then he resumed his patrol, giving her space to grieve. During meal distribution, Green never shorted portions, never made the women wait longer than necessary, never used his authority to humiliate. It was the absence of cruelty that spoke loudest. The other prisoners noticed. They'd watch him during roll call, how he learned their names, how he pronounced them carefully, how he never shouted unless safety demanded it. "He's different," Greta whispered once. Helga nodded. "He's kind." The word felt revolutionary. Because in a place built for punishment, kindness was the most subversive weapon of all. And slowly, day by day, Samuel Green was dismantling everything they'd been taught, not with speeches or force, but with the simple radical act of treating them like human beings. Camp Huntsville. Late January 1946, kitchen duty was the quietest shift. Most prisoners avoided it. Steam and scalding water, grease burns and long hours. But Ingrid Koch volunteered. It meant extra time away from the barracks, away from the weight of too many women in too small a space. And sometimes it meant conversation. Sergeant Green was inspecting the kitchen stores when Ingrid dropped a pot. It clattered across the floor, and she flinched, still expecting the kind of punishment that came from clumsiness under Wehrmacht officers. Green just picked it up and handed it back. "It's all right," he said in English. "Happens." Ingrid nodded, switching to English herself. "Thank you, Sergeant." He paused, surprised. "Your English is good. I studied languages before the war. Berlin University." "Ah." He smiled slightly. "I only got through 10th grade. Needed to work." The admission hung between them, an offering of normalcy, of shared humanness. "May I ask," Ingrid said carefully, "why you are so patient with us?" Green was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned against the counter, arms crossed, weighing something heavy. "My younger brother," he said finally, "James. He was 21, worked at a garage in Albany, Georgia. Smart kid, always fixing things." Ingrid waited. "A white woman said he looked at her wrong. That's all it took. They came for him that night." Ingrid's hands stilled in the dishwater. "They lynched him," Green said, his voice flat, drained of emotion through repetition. "Hung him from a tree outside town. Sheriff said it was frontier justice. Nobody was arrested. Nobody ever is." The words fell like stones. Ingrid felt the room tilt. She'd been taught that barbarism lived elsewhere, that civilization was a European invention, that savage violence belonged to the Untermenschen, the subhumans, the inferior races. But Green's brother had been murdered by a mob. In America. In the country that called itself the defender of freedom. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words inadequate and small. Green nodded. "Me too." He straightened, preparing to leave, then paused. "I tell you this because you asked why I'm patient. Truth is, I've seen what hate does. I've seen what happens when people stop seeing each other as human." He met her eyes. "I won't be part of that. Not here, not anywhere." He left. Ingrid stood alone in the kitchen, hands submerged in cold, greasy water, and felt the last foundations of her old worldview collapse. The monsters, she realized, had never been the ones she was taught to fear. The monsters were the ones who'd taught her to fear them. Camp Huntsville. February 1946. Discipline existed. Rules were enforced. But there was a difference between order and cruelty, and the women learned to recognize it. When morning roll call ran late because a prisoner overslept, Sergeant Green didn't scream. He simply noted it and moved on. When Greta accidentally broke a dish during mess duty, the guard supervising her, Corporal Davis, just handed her a broom and said, "Careful next time." No slaps, no screaming, no public humiliation designed to break spirits, just consequences that fit the mistake, just enforcement without degradation. The women noticed. The first thank you note appeared in the guard station on a Tuesday morning. It was written in shaky English on a scrap of paper. "Thank you for blanket. HR." Green recognized Helga's initials. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. By the end of the week, there were more. Small notes left on benches, tucked under coffee cups, slipped through fence links. "Danke for medicine. You are kind man. God bless." The women began volunteering for extra duties, not because they were forced, but because idleness felt worse than purpose. They swept the yards without being asked. They organized supply rooms. They mended torn clothing for other prisoners. They were reclaiming dignity through labor, through contribution, through choosing to participate rather than simply endure. The moment came on a gray afternoon in late February. Helga was finishing her shift in the laundry building. 6 hours of washing, wringing, hanging. Her hands were raw, her back ached, but she'd worked methodically, carefully, treating each task as if it mattered, because it did. It was all she had left. As she folded the last sheet, Corporal Washington, a quiet guard from Mississippi who rarely spoke, entered for inspection. He walked through the rows of hanging laundry, checking the work. Then he stopped in front of Helga. She tensed, expecting criticism. Instead, Corporal Washington stood at attention and saluted her. A full military salute, crisp, respectful, deliberate. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "good work." Then he turned and left. Helga stood frozen, laundry basket in her hands, tears streaming down her face. A black soldier had just saluted a Nazi prisoner. Not mockery, not sarcasm. Respect, recognition of work done with dignity, recognition of shared humanity in a place where humanity was the rarest currency. The reversal was complete. She had come here expecting to be treated as subhuman by people she'd been taught were subhuman. Instead, she'd been shown what it meant to be human by men who'd spent their entire lives being told they weren't. The lesson was devastating, and it was the only lesson that mattered. Highway 45, Texas. February 1946, Sergeant Green and Corporal Davis drove the supply truck into town, a routine run for camp provisions. They'd left at dawn, both men in full uniform, both carrying military IDs that granted them authority over enemy prisoners of war. The diner was called Rosie's. White tablecloths, fresh coffee, a sign in the window, "We support our troops." Green pulled into the parking lot. Davis looked at him. "Sam?" "I know." They both knew. Green walked to the door anyway. A white waitress met him before he could enter, her smile tight and apologetic. "I'm sorry, honey. We don't serve coloreds. There's a place about 2 miles down that'll take care of you." Green stood there in his sergeant's stripes, his U.S. Army uniform, his combat ribbons from the European theater. He'd just spent the morning ensuring Nazi prisoners received hot meals and medical care. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. They ate lunch in the truck, cold sandwiches from the base. Behind them, through Rosie's window, they could see white soldiers, some of whom had never left Texas, being served hot plates and fresh pie. Camp Huntsville, the same day. The German prisoners ate in the mess hall. Warm food, clean plates, coffee that was bitter but hot. Helga watched Sergeant Green return from the supply run. He looked tired, more tired than usual. She didn't know why. She couldn't know. That he'd been denied service in his own country while she, a former Nazi auxiliary, was guaranteed 3 meals a day under his protection. That the United States military demanded he treat enemy prisoners with dignity, while America itself refused him the same. Separate, but never equal. At the base hospital, a white nurse refused to let Corporal Washington use the whites-only bathroom. He walked a quarter-mile to the segregated facility instead. When he returned to camp, he checked on Greta, the prisoner who'd been sick, making sure she had clean linens and medicine. The bus station in Huntsville. Private Jenkins, on leave for his mother's funeral, sat in the back of the Greyhound. The colored section. The seats were torn, the air thick with heat and exhaust fumes. In front of him, a group of German POWs, male prisoners being transferred between camps, sat in the white section. They were given water at rest stops, allowed to use the regular facilities. Jenkins watched them through the divider and felt something calcify in his chest. He guarded Nazi women with respect because that's what he'd been trained to do. But America wouldn't let him sit at the front of a bus. The contradiction was everywhere. Black soldiers enforcing order and dignity in POW camps they couldn't visit as civilians. Black guards ensuring prisoners received constitutional protections they themselves were denied in 14 states. Black men in uniform saluted by enemy combatants, ignored by their own neighbors. Sergeant Green wrote home again that week. "Dear Mama, today I was refused service at a diner for the color of my skin. Then I came back and served dinner to women who fought for Hitler. I don't know what to do with that truth. I don't know how to hold it. But I do know this. If I become the thing they say I am, if I let their hate make me cruel, then they win. So I'll keep doing my job. I'll keep treating people right, even when my own country won't do the same for me. Your son, Samuel. He sealed the letter. Outside, through the fence, Helga watched him walk his patrol. She still didn't know. But one day she would learn, and the shame would be unbearable. Camp Huntsville, March 1946. Repatriation Day. The women lined up with their few possessions, preparing to board the transport trucks that would take them to ships bound for Germany, back to a country that no longer existed as they'd known it, back to rebuild from rubble and shame. Helga stood near the gate, watching Sergeant Green conduct final processing. When her turn came, he checked her papers, nodded, and extended his hand. She took it. "Thank you," she said in careful English, "for everything." Green's expression was unreadable. "Go home. Be better than what you were taught." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was a challenge. Hamburg, Germany, June 1946. Helga sat in her mother's bombed-out apartment, writing on salvaged paper. "I don't know if this letter will reach you, Sergeant Green, but I need to write it anyway. We were enemies. You had every right to treat us with the cruelty we deserved. You had every reason to hate us. Instead, you showed us what humanity looks like. I was taught that you were subhuman, that black people were incapable of civilization, honor, or compassion. I believed these lies because I was told they were science. But you treated us better than our own officers ever did. You gave us dignity when we deserved none. You taught us respect by showing it first. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to undo the damage I helped cause. Thank you for being the man you are, despite everything this world has done to you." Helga Reinhardt, Munich, Germany, 1949. Ingrid Koch stood in front of a classroom of German children. 42 students staring at her with the same eager faces she'd once had at their age. On the chalkboard she'd written, "What is civilization?" "Who can tell me?" she asked. A boy raised his hand. "Being advanced, having technology and culture." "Good answer," Ingrid said, "but incomplete." She walked to the window, looking out at the city still rebuilding from the war. "I once believed civilization was something you were born into, that some races had it and others didn't. I was taught this in schools just like this one, by teachers who sounded as confident as I do now." The children shifted uncomfortably. "Then I was captured, and I was placed under the guard of black American soldiers, men I'd been taught were subhuman, incapable of moral reasoning." She turned back to face them. "Those men treated me with more dignity, more respect, more humanity than I had ever shown anyone I considered beneath me. They fed us, protected us, showed us kindness when we deserved none." A girl in the front row raised her hand. "Why?" "Because," Ingrid said softly, "civilization isn't about race or technology or power. It's about how you treat people when you have every reason not to. It's about choosing humanity when hate would be easier." She picked up chalk and wrote beneath the original question, "Civilization is measured not by what we build, but by how we treat those who cannot defend themselves. This," she said, "is the only lesson that matters, and it's the one they'll never teach you unless someone like me, someone who learned it the hard way, tells you the truth." The letters kept coming. For years. "We were treated better by black men than we ever were by our own officers. They showed us what we should have been. I will never forget their kindness, or my shame." Changed hearts, writing truth into a world that had believed lies for too long. The photograph is grainy, black and white, dated March 1946. It shows a group of German women prisoners standing near a fence at Camp Huntsville. In the background, slightly out of focus, you can see Sergeant Samuel Green conducting his patrol. No one is smiling, but no one looks afraid. It's just a moment, ordinary, unremarkable, But contained within that single frame is a revolution that neither side wanted to acknowledge. The real battlefield wasn't in Europe. It wasn't marked by artillery or treaties or surrendered flags. It was fought in the space between expectation and reality, between propaganda and truth, between who we're told to fear and who we choose to see. 50 German women arrived at Camp Huntsville believing black soldiers were subhuman. They left knowing they'd been lied to about everything, not through lectures, not through force, but through the quiet, persistent reality of men who chose dignity over vengeance, kindness over cruelty, humanity over hate. Munich, Germany, 1983. Ingrid Koch, 71 years old, sits for an oral history interview. Her hands shake slightly as she holds a photograph, the same one from 1946. The interviewer asks, "What did you learn in that camp?" Ingrid is quiet for a long moment. Then, "We met the people we were told were monsters. They were men, good men, better than we deserved." She pauses, her voice breaking. "They didn't just guard us. They showed us what we'd lost, what we'd thrown away when we believed the lies." Another pause. "We thought we were the civilized ones. We thought we understood what it meant to be human." She looks directly at the camera. "But we were the ones who had to learn humanity all over again, from the very people we'd been taught to despise." She sets down the photograph. "That," she says, "was the real liberation." The revolution was quiet, but it changed everything.